I'm writing this because I can't sleep and because saying what happened in plain order feels like the only way to keep it contained. I'm not using last names. We were 6 people. Me, Danny, Shane, Liv, Kyle, and Marcus. We went to a cabin in northern Minnesota, past Ely, but not all the way to the border. The cabin belonged to an old neighbor of Shane's, who said we could use it so long as we packed out our trash and kept the pipes from freezing. It was the 3rd week of January. The forecast said single digits during the day and well below 0 at night. We brought a generator, 5 gallons of treated gas, a tote of split oak, a tote of mixed food, powdered soup, instant potatoes, jerky, oatmeal, 2 propane camp lanterns, a cheap 2-way radio set, a hand axe, a folding saw, a small first aid kit with 2 Mylar blankets, 6 headlamps with lithium batteries, and one 30 lever-action rifle that belonged to Shane's dad. The idea was simple: 2 nights, maybe 3, of board games and quiet. No one was planning to hunt. There would be some day hikes on snowshoes if the wind wasn't too bad. We were all in our 30s except Marcus, who was 26 and took pictures of everything. I'm setting this down in the same order it happened and with the measurements and times we noted at the time or soon after. I know memory gets soft around shock. Numbers help. The cabin sat at the end of a seasonal road that a local plow guy kept open to the last mailbox. From there, the driveway was a half mile of 2 faint ruts through black spruce and aspen. We parked at the mailbox at 3:10 p.m. and hiked in with sleds and packs. It was overcast, light wind from the north. On the way, we passed a set of old snowmobile tracks crusted over, heading parallel to our drive before cutting across it and into the trees. The cabin itself was a 1-room structure with a small loft, metal roof, and a detached shed for the generator about 20 yards back behind the outhouse. The front door faced south. There were 2 double-pane windows, one on the east wall, one on the west. The door had a hasp and padlock, but the padlock was hanging open, and there was an old bent nail through the hasp. Inside, the temperature was 19 degrees Fahrenheit by the little round analog thermometer on the north wall. There was a black iron stove with some ash in it, a wood box with maybe 1/3 of a cord of mixed birch and aspen, a small table, 3 chairs, 2 bunks, and a ladder to the loft that had plywood sheets and old army blankets. We did a walkthrough, checked cupboards for mouse sign, found some but not much, and then set about heating the place. By 5 p.m., the stove had the interior up into the 40s, and the air felt less biting. Shane primed the generator, set the choke, and had it running by the 3rd pull. The shed had a plywood door with 2 hasps and a crossbar on the inside, so we left it open a crack for ventilation and sat the generator on concrete blocks. We ran an extension line along 2 eye-screws to the cabin, and now we had a light bulb, a 2-plug outlet by the table, and the small comfort of the fridge running. It was empty except for a mason jar of bear fat with dust on the lid and a bag of frozen peas someone had left behind years earlier. We ate soup and bread at 6:30 p.m., did a quick round of cards, and turned the generator off at 10 p.m. to conserve fuel, planning to run it 2 hours on, 2 hours off through the night for the fridge, and to top off phone batteries. The sky cleared after midnight. Stars showed hard and small through the east window. The thermometer read 65 degrees Fahrenheit by then, and we all decided we were fine with just the stove and our sleeping bags. The first thing that felt wrong, objectively, not just nerves, showed up the next morning at 7:20 a.m. Kyle and Marcus went out to get more wood while Danny heated water. I followed to check the latrine before it was too cold to want to sit there. The light was flat, no wind, -6 degrees Fahrenheit by Danny's phone. The snowpack was about knee-deep off the path. Out by the woodpile we saw tracks that weren't ours. A single file line that cut in from the trees on the west side, crossed the packed path, circled the woodpile, and then continued behind the cabin toward the generator shed. The prints were long and narrow, more like dents than footprints, each about 12 to 14 inches long, and maybe 3 or 4 inches at the width of the foot, if I can call it that. The edges were crisp. The stride was between 5 and 6 feet, measured by Kyle with a ski pole held in place while I stepped it out. I'm 5'10". The top of my hip is at about 3 feet. The thing that made my stomach go hard was the way the line of prints would vanish for 8 to 10 feet, and then start again, like something had covered that distance without touching. At first I said it was drifting, but the snow there was undisturbed except for a thin skin that showed the last hour's worth of spindrift. There were no wing marks. There was no double line like someone stepping in their own prints. We followed the trail to the shed, where it did 2 tight circles, passed behind, and then led off into the trees again. The door was still barred. The generator was fine. We took pictures. We didn't make jokes. At 9:40 a.m. we went out on snowshoes to the small lake that Shane said was a 1/4 mile east of the cabin. We brought the rifle and a radio pair on Channel 3. Liv stayed behind to tend the stove and write down a supply list because she said it calmed her brain to count things. The lake was iced over and flat. We stepped off the shoreline and tested with poles. The ice was at least a foot thick where we stood. There were old auger holes frozen over. About 50 yards down the shoreline, we found a place where something had dragged a deer from the trees onto the ice. There was a trail of hair and a stain that had spread under the top layer of clear ice, not bright but a large pale shadow in the ice itself. The drag marks stopped abruptly, no sign of a fight, no scatter of prints around the kill site. On the way back at 10:30 a.m., we noticed tufts of hair snagged higher than seemed right on a dead balsam, roughly 7 feet up. The hair was coarse and hollow like deer hair, pale, not from a dog. Danny bagged a tuft in a zip bag because she does that kind of thing at work, and the habit carries. We said out loud that it was probably a wolf. None of us actually believed that. We kept the daylight busy with wood and chores. The numbers kept coming up off. At 1 p.m. Shane checked the fuel, 4.5 gallons left in our can, and the generator had half a tank. At 2:15 p.m. we noticed the bent nail that had been through the hasp on the cabin door was on the floor under the front window. We had all used the main door through the morning. No one remembered removing the nail, and no one would have tossed it. The hasp eye on the door had a fresh scuff that caught a fingernail. Liv, who had stayed behind, swore she never opened the door for anyone and never took the nail out. We decided then to use the padlock the way we should have used it from the start, and we got a second nail and hammered it into the jamb angled down through the hasp so the door couldn't rise under force. We cut 2 wedges from a scrap 2x4 and made shims for the hinges. It all felt like overkill until 4:40 p.m. when the wind came up and we saw how the trees along the drive shifted and how fast visibility dropped with blown snow. Then it felt necessary. At 7:05 p.m., the generator coughed and died on its own. There was still gas in it. We'd planned to run it until 8 p.m. We waited 2 minutes to see if it would smooth out. Then Kyle and Marcus suited up to go check it, and I followed because 3 is safer than 2. We used a rope we'd brought for hauling sleds and tied it to the table leg, took 2 headlamps and the camp lantern, and ran the rope out the door and around the porch post as a guide. The air had that dry squeal you get when it's close to 0 and windy. Snow dust went horizontal. My beard froze at the corners of my mouth on the first breath. In the beam of the headlamps, I saw our rope swing, drag, and then snap taut like something had bumped it out there. I remember thinking it was only the wind. The shed had snow piled up against the west wall and the door was shut. We had left it cracked for ventilation. The crossbar was still in place from the inside, so Kyle had to push the door in with his shoulder, get a hand through, and lift. The hole he made was at face level. The smell that came out wasn't gas. It was animal. Not rot, not feces. Wet hair and blood when it's fresh, a copper tang. The generator was sitting on the blocks where we left it, but the choke had been snapped off, not just pushed to run, but physically snapped. The plastic lever was on the floor of the shed. There were 2 gouges in the pine door rail right at eye height, almost parallel, 3 inches apart. Marcus lit them from the side with his phone flashlight, so the texture showed, and said they looked like nail marks. They were clean through the soft early wood. We turned the generator off, which was easy since it was already off, and we took the plug out and brought it back to the cabin. No sense running it without a choke in that weather anyway, and no sense leaving the shed without a door we could control. We put the bar back in the inside brackets and pulled the door till it wedged. I kept telling myself it was a person. I liked that answer better than anything that fit the stride length. At 11:20 p.m., the first voice came. We had the stove going hot. We were all in long underwear and socks and had our coats hanging near the door ready. The inside light was on and the blinds were down, which made the windows into mirrors. Over the shaking of the stovepipe and the little whistles it makes at the joints, and the occasional loud pop when a log shifts, we heard a small voice from the west side of the cabin say, "Hey." It was the kind of voice you hear on a trail when someone comes up behind you and doesn't want to scare you. Literally the word "hey," soft and neutral. It came from outside the west window. Marcus stood and walked toward the glass like a moth. Danny told him to stop. Then it said, still in that small voice, "Can you help me?" Liv and Kyle looked at each other the way you do when something simple goes wrong in a way that proves it isn't simple. What stopped us from opening the door was that the voice didn't sound cold. There was no shake. It didn't sound old or young. It sounded like a recording played in a room. Shane said, "We have a rifle." The voice said, "We have a rifle," after a gap of 3 or 4 seconds. Same tone, same spacing, no rise, no fall. I wrote the time down because writing small facts was easier than listening. Between 11:20 p.m. and 1:05 a.m., others called out, always to the same purpose. "I'm hurt. Help. Please." Once, very clearly, Danny, followed by Danny's last name. Then, "We have a rifle," that same phrase again exactly. We tried the radio on channel 3. The other set in the gear bin answered with static, and then a clean blast of our own voices delayed by a second or two. Kyle unplugged the cabin bulb and we turned the lantern down so we could see the windows. In the reflection I could see my own face plain, and the doorway was a hole at my shoulder height. Every time a gust came, the rope outside twitched on the porch post and made a soft rubbing squeak. At 1:37 a.m., the west window clicked in the frame in a way that I've only heard when someone presses on the center of the glass with a flat palm. That's not a noise wind makes. We stacked the table on its side and then the bunks against the west wall. There isn't much mass to those bunks, but a barrier is a barrier. The stove dried the air until my sinuses hurt. I could smell the wool of the army blankets and the stale, not dirty smell of plywood in an unheated space. This is a detail that returns in my dreams, the shape of Marcus's headlamp cone on the ceiling, narrow and white with a yellow ring, steady, not shaking, while outside something scraped a line across the clapboard at just above shoulder height and stopped right where the seam of 2 boards met. The scrape was 6 feet off the deck. We measured that later. At 2:12 a.m., not long after the scraping stopped, we heard the voice again but at the back of the cabin. Same recordings of our phrases, same Donnie. Then a new one, "Live." Then, after 10 seconds, "Live," pitched a little lower, and then lower still, like someone trying out 2 sizes of the same shoe. Liv was the one who began to cry. She did it without noise, face bare, tears straight down. Kyle put his hand on the back of her neck and left it there. We had a talk we didn't want to have about whether there could be a person out there and what our responsibilities would be if there were. We listed facts, temperature, wind, no tracks across the snow to the windows since morning. The generator shed door wedged from the inside, the choke lever snapped, the nail marks in the door rail, the fact that the voice had no breath in it and copied us like a loop. We decided we were hearing something that would say anything to get the door open. The decision didn't make us feel moral. It felt like putting a lid on a pot that was about to pop. At 3:03 a.m., something hit the porch. That's the time on my phone, recorded in my notes. The deck boards shook. The wall by the door flexed. A cluster of small things fell off the top of the fridge. The first hit was a single impact. The second, at 3:04 a.m., was 2 feet moving around, weight shifting. The third was a slow, steady pressure on the door that made both hinges creak. Danny stood up with the rifle and clicked the hammer back. She didn't point it at the door, just kept it at the floor at an angle. We had 2 boxes of soft point, 20 rounds each. We didn't want to shoot the door open for it. At 3:06 a.m. the pressure stopped, and there was a sound like a big animal stepping off onto powder snow. Marcus went to the east window and lifted the bottom edge of the blind a finger's width. Then he whispered, "Oh," not surprised, not scared, just like he had finally solved a math problem he had wrestled with for an hour, and didn't like the answer. He didn't describe it then, and I won't describe it in a way that throws a curtain over other people's pictures. I will say it stood tall enough that its head, when it turned, was above the eave, which was about 8 feet. I will say it was narrow at the waist, shoulders too wide for the rest of it, and that its elbows seemed too far down. I will say a deer's skin tears easily when pulled the wrong way, and the thing on the ice the morning before hadn't torn. Daylight didn't end the problem, it changed it. At 7:45 a.m., the wind fell. The temperature climbed towards 0. We made a plan to leave once the light settled. The road would be drifted, but if we packed quickly and moved in one line, we could get to the cars by 9 a.m. and get them started. From there it would be another problem, but a familiar one involving shovels and calling the plow guy from the last mailbox. We ate dry granola. Danny said she thought she smelled iron again and opened the east window an inch to prove there was no source in the cabin. The air came in sharp and cut down the stove draw, so the smoke nudged out along the stovetop seam for 2 coughs. In that small breath, the smell came with such clarity that even Shane stopped talking. Fresh blood, cold hair, and a sour note like old pennies. She shut the window. By 8:10 a.m. we had packed. We wrapped our sleeping bags around our torsos inside our coats to build a layer. We tied the hauling rope around our waists with 4-foot spacing. Kyle took the front to break trail, then Danny, then Liv, me, Marcus and Shane at the back with the rifle. We had one rule that mattered. If one stopped, all stopped. If one fell, the person behind went down on purpose and the person in front braced. We opened the door at 8:18 a.m. with the 30 leveled at the frame. The porch was clear. The temperature was -3 degrees Fahrenheit. The sky was uniform white. Visibility in the trees was 2 rows of trunks before everything merged into gray. We stepped off the porch and immediately saw the line of those long, narrow dents coming from the west woods into the hardpack of our little yard. They circled the cabin once, twice, then 4 times, then cut a quick path to the generator shed, and then back into the trees. No prints crossed the final 12 feet from the edge of the yard to the porch. We moved. At 8:22 a.m., 20 yards from the cabin, Liv's headlamp came off her hat and swung down. She let go of the lamp instead of the rope and the lamp bounced. In the second she bent to catch it, something touched the rope between her and Danny. Not a pull, a weight. It pushed the rope down in the snow and the rope burned across my hip as it took the slack. I fell backward. Shane went forward to keep me from jerking Liv off her feet and the rifle barrel dipped. Danny did what you do when a dog runs between your legs on a leash. She lifted and tried to set the rope over it, and her glove came away with a sheen of black hair that wasn't hair the way a dog's is hair, more like the outer coarse hairs off a deer tail but longer. 4 inches, straight. It was so black it showed blue. She stared at it for half a second and then we kept moving. No one said run. No one had to. At 8:28 a.m., something paced us to the left, in the trees west of the drive. It didn't stay parallel. It would get ahead, then fall back, then get ahead again. We could see it sometimes at the edge of white. It was wrong in a plain way. It would move behind a stand of 3 trunks and then for too long there would be nothing again, and then it would step out where the line of those trunks couldn't have hid the distance it had traveled. Call it a trick of the eye if you want. I'm only saying what I saw. At 8:34 a.m. came the voice from 40 yards ahead, on the drive, our own flat-spoken, "We have a rifle," like someone had set up a speaker at the bend and toggled it. We paused for 1 second exactly and then moved again. I will keep saying times because they are the pegs that hold the thing up in my mind. At 8:37 a.m., the line broke. The drive dipped, and the snow was deeper. Kyle misstepped into the ditch. Danny braced, but her foot hit a buried log and she dropped to a knee. The rope jerked at all our waists like a pulled kite string. Liv got pulled to the side. I sat down on purpose and dug my heels in. Marcus took a step back to help Liv. and in that instant, whatever had been pacing us gave up on pacing. I did not see it take Marcus. I heard the rope sing, and I saw it saw into the top layer of drift, and I saw the shape at the left edge of my vision block out a band of gray the width of a doorway, and I saw Marcus's mouth open without sound before the sound came. The rope went past me so hard it burned through my glove, and I felt the heat of it through 2 layers. Shane fired once, maybe twice. I know he worked the lever between because I saw the brass kick and spin in the cold air. The rope went slack and then tight, but the tightness was wrong. It was high, up from the snow, at an angle that made no sense if Marcus was on the ground. I leaned my weight into it and felt 0, like I'd hooked a line into a tree and was pretending to help. Danny shouted, "Cut it!" and Kyle had his belt knife open from his fall and slashed the section between Danny and Liv. The hiss in my ear after the cut was the wind in the trees, sharp and even like a line of steam. Shane fired again, then again. The echo behaved the way sound behaves in trees, which is to say it came back crooked and delayed. Somewhere in that echo, something screamed. It did not sound like any animal I know, and I grew up around coyotes and foxes, and the strange holes they have in their throats. This had language in it, but not words. It stopped, as if someone had put a hand on it and squeezed. We got to the mailbox at 8:52 a.m., 4 minutes under our plan, but it felt like hours. Kyle's hands shook so hard he dropped his keys twice. Liv couldn't get her seatbelt latched and made small sounds with her mouth open like a kid practicing a whistle that won't start. Danny kept saying Marcus, and then quieting herself, which made it worse. Shane sat in the truck bed with the rifle pointed up at nothing in particular and watched the tree line. I stood beside the driver's door and counted out loud to 60 and started again because it gave my mouth something to do. The first time the engine turned it coughed, caught, and then died because the idle was low from the cold. The second time it caught and held at 800 revolutions per minute, then dipped, then came back. We were moving by 8:57 a.m. The snow on the seasonal road had drifted, but the crust on top had a crust on top, and the truck's tires found the ruts from the plow. We fishtailed once past the last big spruce, and then saw the black ribbon of the maintained road through the blowing white. Kyle didn't stop at the stop sign. There was no cross traffic. There was nothing but that white and the black top and the sensation of a fingertip lifting from the back of your neck. Only when we reached the green reflector for the fire number did anyone look back. The drive was a line of trees and frozen air. If something stood in it, it stood still. We found the plow truck a mile down, turned sideways in the road, while the driver knocked snow crust off the wings. He'd been working up from town and said he'd have been to us by noon. Sorry if we got anxious. Danny asked him without preface if he had seen anything large on or near our road, and he said he'd seen a moose cow and calf 2 mornings back on the county line. That was it. We followed his truck into town with the heat up full and our coats still on because the cold had gotten into us, in a way the heater couldn't push out. We stopped at the sheriff's office at 9:30 a.m. and told them we had lost a friend in the woods. We left out the voice and the prints. We said he had fallen into the ditch and been separated, and that we needed help combing. I could see in the deputy's face when I mentioned the generator shed and the broken choke that we were failing at neutral. He asked why we were looking at a generator at night, and we said to manage fuel. He asked why we had a gun if we weren't hunting, and we said for wolves. He said wolves don't come to people, and I said we knew that, and I didn't add that sometimes we say things to keep living. They took our statement and told us to stay put while they contacted SAR. Search started at 12:10 p.m. because there were other calls that day. We sat in the Civic Center in folding chairs by a heater that burned propane and made the air taste fried. A man with a gray beard brought coffee and told us to drink it whether we wanted it or not. We did. At 3:50 p.m., a deputy came back, cleaned his boots on the rubber mat, and told us they had found the cabin, and could we come look to confirm our things so they knew they were in the right place. We said yes. The sun was down by then, and we drove in a little convoy of 2 sheriff's trucks and the plow truck for the drifted sections. We stopped at the mailbox. The deputies snapped snowshoes on with the practice of people who grew up there, and lent us 2 pairs and told the rest of us to stay behind the broke trail. We reached the cabin at 5:20 p.m. The door had been ripped outward. The nail we had hammered was bent like a hook and still in the jamb. The padlock lay in the snow 4 feet from the porch, scuffed with fresh marks as if someone had kicked it. The west window had a star crack the size of a fist 1 pane in. Inside, the stove was open and dead. The bunks and table we had stacked were slid sideways a foot. On the shed door rail, the 2 gouges we had seen were now 4, set in pairs. They measured 3 inches between the inner pair and 8 inches between the outermost. One of the deputies put his glove in the longest and said it felt like something had raked off sapwood with a dull fork. Off the porch, the yard was overrun with prints that matched nothing in the deputy's collection book. That book smelled like school and oil and made my stomach turn. The prints were the same long dents we had followed the first morning, plus new ones, narrower. Some crossed 2 and 2, some double-stepped like something correcting itself mid-stride. The searchers said, "Moose don't do that." They said people can do that with stilts, but not on a grade and not that far, and not leaving no fall or check marks. They did not say what made them. They did not find Marcus. We stayed that night at a motel where the bedspreads were brown and clean. Danny woke 3 times with her breath caught and then slept and then woke again. Shane put the rifle under the bed and saw that there was no point in doing that and put it back in the truck after checking the chamber twice. Liv laid out her mittens on the heater and stared at them like you look at food. You know you need to eat but can't start. Kyle stood in the shower until the hot water ran out and the steam drifted away, and he was left breathing cold air in a tiled box. I wrote all this down, times, tastes, temperatures, because it kept the bigger thing from breaking the room in half. In the morning, we gave the cabin key back to the neighbor who owned it. He said we'd had bad luck with a transient, and he'd put a second bar on the door, and we were welcome again any time. He said he'd never had problems up there. I did not argue. I did not use any of the words we'd used among ourselves. We drove home and we kept to the slow lane for the first 50 miles, because passing looked like a kind of risk we didn't deserve to take. Over the next weeks, the sheriff called twice. The second time, he asked if we were sure Marcus hadn't talked about leaving on his own. We said no, he had not. The deputy said they'd found nothing but a scatter of hair on a snag near the lake, and a place where the ice bore marks, like something heavy had been set on it, and then taken away, but the marks weren't clear enough to be useful. He sounded tired. He sounded like a man counting forms he had to file in triplicate before he could go home. We said thank you. After that, we stopped hearing from the county unless we called, and even then it seemed like the phone lines did not carry our voices with the same interest they once had. I know what people think when they hear the words some locals use for what I'm talking about. They think of a story passed around as punishment, or as a lesson about eating your neighbor when the food runs out, which is a lesson that remains valid even if you don't believe in stories. I am not telling this to satisfy anyone's want for the shape of a thing. I'm telling it because the details matter. The rope that sagged without pulling. The flat voice that didn't rise or fall and waited the same 3 seconds every time. Before repeating the word it had filed, the lever on the generator snapped clean at the fulcrum where only a twisting hand could have done it. The nail marks in soft pine that came in pairs like a person learning to use a tool and getting better at it the second night. The hair in Danny's glove that was hair and not, and did not bend so much as pivot. The smell that arrived with clean air, as if it were a component part of winter itself, and not an accident of a wound. We talk among ourselves sometimes, not often, by text or in short calls, and we keep to facts. Danny transferred to a different station, and says she refuses to pick up out-of-town overtime in January. Liv left her lab and took a job in town and says she does not sleep when the wind is under 10 miles an hour. Kyle got a new truck and says he won't take the old seasonal roads anymore, even in July. Shane keeps the rifle out now in his own house, which he didn't before, and he says he knows that doesn't change anything but a person's hands still like to hold equipment. Me, I write it down. Writing the sequence makes it possible to be in rooms without windows again. When people ask about Marcus, we say what is true, that his car is still in the lot by the Civic Center, and that his mother came to get his clothes, and that the deputies found nothing a person could bring to a judge and put on a table. If you go out there, you won't see a warning sign. The trees won't have marks. The snow will look like all snow looks when it is cold enough to squeak. The cabin will be whatever it is now after someone else mended the door and set screw plates over the hinges and put a new lock on the hasp. Maybe somebody will stay there and have a clean, quiet weekend and go home with a story about how calm the woods can be when the air is sharp and empty. I am not saying you will meet what we met. I am saying we did, and at the end only some of us left that road. I won't go back. The others who came out with me won't either. We said it to each other in the parking lot before we drove off in 3 cars, one spot left open between them, the early sun a white smudge over the town garage. We said it without drama, like a rule. We barely got out. That is enough. We will not go back there again. This is a throwaway. Don't try to find me. I'm writing this from a place with no address and one road that doesn't get plowed. If I disappear after this, print it and hand it to the county sheriff or the DNR. Tell them not to say the name out loud. Tell them I'm sorry. The cold in the Superior Forest doesn't feel like weather. It feels like a decision the world made without you. It gets into your molars and sits behind your eyes. It slows you down until even your thoughts start to creak. We had a saying on search and rescue. If you're sweating, you're dying. If you're comfortable, you're lying. That night, I lied to myself for the last time. We got the call at 16:22, 2 hours before the sun gives up in December. A trapper named Walt hadn't checked in. He had a line of conibears set out along the ice creeks that split the jackpine. His niece said he hadn't missed a check-in in 20 years. Not even the winter his truck spun into a ditch and froze all the way to the axles. She called from town, voice shaking. You could hear the store radio behind her, a hockey game hissing through bad speakers. It made the whole thing feel smaller than it was. By 17 o'clock, I was at staging in the snowplow turnaround off County 44. My partner Matt thumped my shoulder with a mitten the size of a roast. He had a grin you could feel through his balaclava. Last one this year, he said. We'll find him snoring by his stove. You remember how to smile when your beard's frozen? I asked. It's a talent. Most of our team came, because the old men come out for the old men. Neon jackets popped against the bruised dusk. Radios rattled. We checked pack weights with gloved knuckles, each of us pretending we didn't hear the weather radio whispering numbers with minus signs. The wind had started stacking needles of snow into the ditches, making little dunes that wanted to be mountains. There was one person at staging who wasn't us. She sat on her tailgate with a thermos in both hands, steam ghosting her face. I knew her as Dawn, the grocery store cashier who calls everyone honey and gives kids candy when their parents aren't looking. Anishinaabe, late 50s maybe, so light on her feet you'd swear the ground was smoother under her. I'd seen her on the powwow grounds in the summer, moving like she was made of water. Her gaze slid past the trucks, past the volunteer fire guys spit laughing at nothing, and found me. She didn't smile. You're going out there, she said. That's the job. You have spruce gum? She asked. Not in a while. Chew some, she said. It keeps your mouth busy so you don't say the wrong things. Matt nudged me, the grin back in his voice. What, like please and thank you? Dawn took a breath that looked like a prayer she refused to say out loud. Don't whistle, she said. Don't say your names. Don't answer your names once you're under the trees. This is the part where someone reading gets mad at me. Because this is where I should have listened and stayed. But I've stacked sandbags against the rainy river during a spring flood. Slept in a helicopter that smelled like spilled fuel and wet wool, followed a bleeding boot trail into a muskeg no map admits exists. I knew cold. I knew lost. I did not know hungry. We strapped on snowshoes and went in. The trail into the timber was a tunnel of blue light, the snow reflecting the last of the day up into the firs, so their undersides glowed. We walked single file to save energy. My pack frames creaked like hulls in ice. The only thing that kept time was the squeak crunch of snow under our webbing and the occasional radio check that came in as a mumble from someone's chest. At 1812, we found Walt's truck at the old forestry gate. The door was shut but not locked. The thermos on the passenger seat was capped and half full, still warm. The dashboard had a photograph tucked in the corner, a boy in a little orange hoodie holding a trapping license too big for his hands. The boy wasn't the point, the hands were the point. It was as if the picture was of two hands luck had blessed, and the face attached to them just happened to be there too. We followed the snowmobile track behind the gate. It ran clean through the first flat of pines, cut down to the old tote road, and then kept going north, over a beaver dam that had turned to a lump of white in the dark. Our headlamps carved cones into the cold. The breath coming out of the conifers hung around like fog. And then the track broke. He'd jerked the sled hard right, off the road and into young popple. Little fists of trunks that slapped your sleeves. We lost the line, found it again, lost it again. Whatever happened, he'd been in a hurry. I pictured the way old men get angry at their own bodies. Legs that forget their legs, fingers that turn into useless pink wood. We reached a cut bank where wind had scoured the snow down to starved grass. The trail turned to a smear. After 20 minutes of grid searching, I smelled copper. I don't know how else to say it. It wasn't blood. There wasn't any in that temperature. It was the idea of blood, the penny ghost of it, the way a coin tastes when you put it in your mouth. I smell it too, Matt said. We moved our lamps in long, slow sweeps. The beam caught on something thin and pale stuck in a sapling, fluttering. It was a strip of hide, martened by the feel, frozen just enough that it could wave like a flag and not snap. It had been tied with green jute twine, same kind Walt used to keep everything from coffee tins to prayer bundles shut. The knot wasn't his. It was clumsy and too tight, like whoever tied it had hands that didn't remember being hands. Marker, Matt asked. Maybe. We followed strips like that, every 30 yards, a trail of small mistakes. Twice the strips were tied to nothing, just crimes against the idea of knotting, hanging in midair like whoever made them didn't understand the sapling was what made it an anchor. You tell yourself stories to keep going. Mine was simple. He'd gotten cold. He'd lost his mind. He'd laced the world with little reminders of himself so the world would have to give him back. We hit the creek at 1903. Its skin was black where the current kept the ice thin, and silver where it had frozen solid under blown powder. There was a snow bridge over it because the wind didn't care about us or the creek or the physics of all that weight. We crossed. On the far side, a balsam snag loomed like a hanging thing. Someone had fastened more jute there, around a fist-sized bundle. "Don't touch it," Matt said. I didn't hear him or pretended not to. I pulled off a glove and unwrapped the twine. Inside was a knot of rushes and old bones. Squirrel, rabbit, a little bird skull with the beak missing. Spruce gum glued the bundle into itself, amber stiff. I didn't know the meaning of it. I just knew the feeling. Watching your dad throw away a drawing you made because to him it looks like trash. Because he doesn't understand that in your hands it had power. "Leave it," Matt repeated. "We should take it," I said. "If he made it, it means he was here. And if he didn't?" I wrapped the twine back around and pulled the knot tight. It sounded like stepping on frozen hair. There were tracks around the tree in the snow. Not the tidy little ovals of deer, not the punching circles of moose, not the 2x4 of a man in snowshoes either. These were narrow, wrong, as if something that had once known how feet worked had forgotten and was trying to reinvent them with sticks. Long claws or long toes had gouged the crust, so each track had a ragged tail. The stride was wrong too long, too high, sometimes overlapping itself like a jitter in a handwriting sample. I don't scare easy. That's not a brag. It's a result of too much time alone, in places your pulse doesn't belong. But those tracks made a feeling rise under my breastbone like lift on a wing. A sensation that if I didn't hold on to something, I would be peeled off the surface of the world and lost. We moved. By 20 o'clock, we'd made a lean-to from a tarp, and found the old line cabin on the topo, a small square by a nameless creek bend. The world had shrunk to what our headlamps could bless. I kept my glove on the radio to keep the battery warm. Every 15 minutes we checked in with staging. All good, all good, all God. The typo lives in that sentence. I keep it because it's what I wrote in my log with a pencil that squeaked. At 21:10, we saw the cabin. It hunched under snow like something guilty, stovepipe angled under ice. We stamped down a pad and did our best to heave the drifted door open. Inside smelled like mouse piss and dry rot. A stovepipe yawned from a drum stove painted with hunting scenes in black flake. The bunks sagged with old blankets that had eaten so much smoke they were a kind of hide now. "Better than dying in the trees," Matt said. "I'll get the stove." He shook his head. "You're colder. You light. I'll brew." We moved in the quiet of people who know that noise takes energy. I packed stove with splits from the wood box. We had ultralight morality. If you find a wood box stocked, you refill it before you leave, even if it costs you. Someone had kept the rule. I let a baseball of birch bark loose under the kindling and bent close, breath held, eyes stinging, until the bark decided to be more than itself. The first crackle felt like mercy itself remembering my name. Something knocked against the far wall. Just once, a shoulder bump. We both froze. Then there was a scraping along the logs like antlers grown too wide for the door frame, dragging. Then two soft impacts. Knuckles on a window. Testing. "Porcupine," Matt said, and even he could hear how bad the lie sounded. "Maybe a branch," I said. He moved to the window with a headlamp and cupped his hands to the glass. "No prints," he said. Just ice." We ate noodles out of the pot with spoons. I hated every swallow for how human it made me feel. How soft. How made of grain. We didn't talk. Heat slowly rolled out from the stove, and it was like being forgiven. Every once in a while, we heard something move outside. Not circling, not pacing. More like a person learning to remember a song they used to love. Trying the notes in different orders, practicing. At 22:06, someone called my name. It wasn't a voice, it wasn't not a voice. "Evan," it said, almost gently, the way a mother says now when you're making a scene in the grocery store. Matt stared at me. My spoon clanked the pot. "I didn't," he started. The voice tried again, as if something was rethreading a machine and jamming on the spools. Evan. I have never in my life wanted so badly to answer my own name. I told you I don't scare easily, but the desire was a hand on the back of my head. It wanted me to turn it, to answer. Present, I thought, the way you do when teachers call you. Dawn's voice from the tailgate in my head. "Don't answer your names once you're under the trees." I put my hand over my mouth and stared at the stove until the red of it bled into my vision. Outside, the knocking stopped. The scraping of antlers stopped. The trying stopped, the practicing, the play. Silence fell like a blanket the landscape tucked itself into. We didn't sleep. We were too warm to remember cold correctly, too cold to trust warmth as anything but a trick. At 1 o'clock, I stood up because I needed to move, or I would climb the walls. I took my lamp and shone it around the cabin and froze on the table. Something had placed my bootlaces there. They were coiled into a perfect square. That means nothing to you unless you've been in the woods long enough to learn that geometry can be a form of intent. Animals don't make squares. Wind doesn't. Men do. Or things that envy men do. My boots were still on my feet. My laces were still threaded. But there they were, a pair of laces exactly like mine, worn in the same places. The aglet chewed where I used to bite it as a nervous habit. They were also wet, as if they had been in a mouth recently. "Matt," I said softly. He looked, then looked away so fast you could hear the muscles in his neck refuse. He stripped his gloves off so he could feel the wooden handle of his knife. "Walt," he whispered, like the old man might walk in and laugh and tell us we'd been hazed by the world's worst camp prank. I shook my head. We packed in silence. The stove hissed and ranted with heat. The aluminum snow shovel on the wall clicked as it expanded, a little metronome. At 2:11, the door tried to open. I say tried like a polite person at your house, who's not sure if they should let themselves in. Pressure came and went, the latch ticking in its ring. Twice it lifted high enough to clear. Twice it let itself settle back. The third time, it didn't. The door swung inward and Cold walked in wearing a man. He was taller than any man I've ever known, not because of how many inches there were from his feet to his head, but because of how many inches there were from his head to the idea of a ceiling. He had ended up with a human shape the way driftwood ends up in the shape of a woman sometimes. You could see the resemblance from the right angle, if love was involved. His face was a misunderstanding that had been allowed to become permanent. Eyes too deep. Mouth a little too far back from teeth that had forgotten the courtesy of lips. When he breathed in, the cold pleaded with him to keep it, fog moving backward into him. He wore antlers because some part of him believed that was how you made yourself handsome. He did not come in far. He did not need to. It would be like saying the sea came into your house when the tide rose and fingered the floorboards in a storm. You went into the sea. Matt stood buried to the hilt in himself. The knife looked like jewelry in his hand, something you'd wear to a prom and regret later when you saw the pictures. I had the ash handle of the stove poker. It felt like something for a different problem. The man thing tried my name one more time. Evan, it said, almost right and old as a mouthful of winter. No, I said because I didn't know what else you said to weather. He tilted his head and one antler touched the lintel of the door and left a dirty mark like a mouse tail. He looked at the stove. He looked at our water pot, rhymed. He looked at where the laces lay square on the table. Behind his teeth there was a pinkness that made me want to lick salt. I can only tell you how it felt. Imagine you are 5. Imagine your mother has walked away in a store, and you are suddenly certain every person is your mother if only you say Mom loudly enough. You walk up to a man at the end of the aisle and you say it. He turns. He is not your mother. But for a split second he is a thing that could feed you. He took a breath and made a sound that isn't a word in any language meant for people. It sounded like wind across a bottle. It sounded like hunger itself trying to learn to be polite. It wanted to say, "May I come in?" It wanted to say you did this when you opened the door. Matt whispered, "Back." Because even with that thing 3 steps into our daytime, he was my partner, and we had trained together, and he loved me enough to get between me and an animal pretending at grace. The thing stepped backward into the dark like a deer being forgiving. It touched the door with the fur on its wrist, and the door closed, because the door wanted that more than it wanted to be a door. We sat and waited for dawn that never came. At 8:10, radio check from staging. I clicked and said, "All God." I rubbed my eyes. "Good," I repeated, like a kid being corrected at the dinner table. We decided we were done being small together in that small place. We stepped out into the bright that comes after a storm, where every edge has been sharpened by cold and every sound is elastic. Our tracks from the night before had been polished by wind. The ones from the door had filled in strangely, not drifted but slumped. No print of a boot, no sign of Walt. There was one track that didn't need snow to remember it. The door frame had teeth marks where the antler had kissed it. We went north, because the old man had gone north, and because I could feel north like a fever now. I was aware of my tongue against my teeth and how sharp they were not. I was aware of my hands and how unfurred they were. It is a special kind of embarrassment to feel how unequipped you are, how unarmed, to be a thing. "You okay?" Matt asked once. "Yeah," I lied. We cut through low bush willow. A raven flew overhead so high it was a moving piece of punctuation against a story I didn't understand. The martenhide flags came fewer now, as if something had gotten bored of pretending to help. At 9:37, we hit a ring in the trees no wind could have made. It was a place where the snow was tamped into something like muscle, and the trunks of the spruce were scored chest high with long slices, as if someone had taken a rake and tried to comb the bark down like hair. In the middle of the circle was a pile of things that could have been a nest or a list. A bent trap stake with mud frozen on the tip. A wolf scat with hair in it that wasn't wolf hair. A piece of flannel shirt with snaps. A shin bone of something small and wrong. A ball of green jute twine, and next to it, a single aglet bitten from a lace, little brass tongue with teeth marks like moons. I took a step toward it. The cold stepped back. The cold was afraid of what lived here. "You smell that?" I asked. "Like pennies," Matt said. "Like pennies that want you to be the slot." He swallowed and nodded. "What now?" "We leave it," I said. He grinned. "You learning?" We turned to go and the trees tilted, not all at once, not like a wind, like the woods had clenched. The sound was a sound I had never heard before and will hear forever now. Snow sliding down bark, not because gravity rubbed its hands together, but because bark had become thinner in one direction and thicker in another. The circle of scoriated trunks flexed. Small chips rained down like white moths. I grabbed Matt's sleeve. He was looking up, mouth open. Something moved in the canopy. I had never once in my life thought about a thing like that as an arboreal animal. I had thought of it as a mistake that could walk, but there are always new images for hunger. It came down the ladder of a tree so fast the eye can't do that kind of math. Matt screamed. It wasn't fear. It was what your vocal cords do when gravity is not where you remember it. I can't tell you what I saw in sequence. I can tell you the shape of it was wrong for descent, and it made itself right by bending where nothing bends without breaking unless it's deciduous, and it was not deciduous. There are rules about impalement and physics, and what happens if a body meets a stake moving at a certain speed. The only rule that applied was that something in those trees had memorized how thumbs work well enough to make traps, and then had forgotten immediately because memory requires being fed. The stake went into Matt. We both had identical notes in our logs at the end of the day. The stake learned a new use. I know because I found his notebook later and read it with shaking hands, his pencil strokes tearing the page. He didn't die. That was the worst part. He did that flopping breath that makes you want to tell someone a joke, any joke, because if you can make them smile, then surely they aren't drowning on dry ground with their eyes trying to point in two different directions. I turned the world into sections. Section 1, stop the bleeding. Section 2, stop the thing. Section 3, get Matt out. Section 4, stop the thing. Section 5, stop the thing. I had no bandages big enough to argue with what had happened to him. I had a stove. I had a nest we weren't supposed to touch. I had a memory that old cabins sometimes have iron things in them that can be made to remember they were stars once. "I need you," I told him, and pressed my forehead to his, and he said, "Find Walt." "I need you," I said again, and in the corner of my vision something large reconfigured itself in the branches like someone folding laundry badly. I ran. The world couldn't follow me into the small circle of heat I built from panic and birch bark and a split birch, but the thing could. It came to the door of the cabin this time and leaned in, and I understood too late that it hadn't wanted to come in before because it had wanted us to invite it. Now, it didn't care. I grabbed the stove's ash door and wrenched until the pin screamed loose. I jammed the plate into the coals until the iron went from black to dull cherry to something that had to hurt to look at. In the doorway, the thing made that bottle sound, that hunger noise, and the antler tip scored new history into the log. It was patient when I was not. That was its advantage. It could wait for me. It could wait for winters. It had. It did. When the iron burned white at the edge, I grabbed it with a wool mitten, which charred instantly and glued to the plate, and ran into the clean kill silence of 10 below zero. I can only give you a still from that moment. Iron swinging up, thing leaning down. The smell of hot meat so pure and horrifying it made my sinuses ache. The iron kissed the part of its face that a human would use to smile. The hiss was not steam. The hiss was language. It was the sound of something that believes it can take anything it wants from a world being told no by something older than language. Metal, fire, falling stars. It recoiled the way a deer does when an electric fence forgets itself and becomes a memory. It knocked into a sapling, and the sapling exploded into powder like a dandelion clock. It backed away, not from me, but from the idea that anything could refuse it. I did not chase. I ran to Matt. He wasn't screaming anymore. He had gotten small, the way big men get when the world jams them into the cracks between seconds. I put my hand against his cheek, the way people do in movies, as if heat could be argued back into a person. I lied again. You're good. I'm going to get the sled," I said. He did not nod. His eyes shifted toward me. I will spend the rest of my life writing about the way his eyes shifted toward me and never make it mean enough. Walt, he said. He was faithful to the end. I lifted him. The stake tried to learn about leverage. I told it no. Sometimes you can tell the world no, and it will listen for a second. He made that whistling sound through his teeth that used to make girls think he was cute when we were 20. We were not 20. I made a travois from 2 saplings and a tarp and pulled him. The world simplified. Pull. Breathe. Don't answer your name. Don't answer his. Don't think about the noise in the trees that wants to be laughter but keeps failing. Don't think about Dawn's hands around that thermos, or the way she didn't say goodbye because she didn't believe goodbye was a thing the night would recognize. Somewhere behind us, the thing moved in a way that shook snow like applause from the limbs. We did not go back to the truck. We went to the road. We went to the thaw the plows kept wider than now. We went to the moonlight. I am jumping time because you need me to live through this to finish the story, and I need to live through it to get to the part that matters. The part where I failed. At 11:44, a snow machine crested the drift and the world became a geometry of noise you could stake a heart to. I waved. I yelled. I said nothing that meant anything. The machine stopped. A kid I didn't know pulled his goggles up. "You Evan?" he said. I nodded before I remembered the warning. Saying yes is a way of answering to your name, too. He looked at Matt and went wide around him like the wounded have gravity. Jesus, what? Don't say that either, I said, because it felt like a prayer would attract a thing that feeds on them. Just help. We loaded Matt. We strapped him. The kid's mouth kept doing little fish opens as he registered the situation in increments. We left the tree spitting heat like a lit match all the way to the blacktop. We threw him in the back of a county truck and slammed the tailgate. I climbed in with him and put my body around his like I could be a blanket and a god. The kid gunned it. In the mirror, I saw the edge of the forest like a lip. Matt didn't make it to the hospital. He made it to the bridge over the Pigeon River, which is not a metaphor and not important to you, except that the bridge's trusses make a sound when tires hit them, a wunk like a heartbeat. His stopped between 2 wunks, and the third one was for me. They cut the tarp away. They cut me away. They cut his shirt away. The emergency room was full of the smell of old coffee and new bleach and the squeak of shoes. The doctor said words like perforation and hemorrhagic, and the kid who had driven us threw up into a glove because nothing else was handy. They cleaned the blood from the metal boards on the table, and the blood froze on the floor where it had spilled, because this is a place where water never forgives you for making it be water. They gave me briefing questions, and I failed them. I failed the whole test. I told them there had been a man at the door with antlers, and they looked at me, and then looked at the floor, and then looked at me again as if I might turn into someone who made more sense. I told them there had been a square made of laces, and they nodded like this was a metaphor they were supposed to encourage. When I told them about the iron and what it did, they wrote nothing. That part didn't fit into anyone's chart. The sheriff's deputy asked if we had found Walt. I said no. He asked if we thought Walt did this. I said no. He asked if I was sure. I said yes, because some words require you to be brave even when you are a coward. He said a lot of things about hypothermia, the paradox of undressing, firewood hallucinations, hiding in stove ovens like witches. He gave the monster a story it could wear to the dance. They let me go because there were forms they couldn't bend into my shape. I walked out into dark so clear I could count stars through different layers of air. You can hear ice crack on a river half a mile away on a night like that. You can hear the highway sing and believe it's a voice. I went to the grocery where Dawn works because I wanted to stand near something alive and being a person. Because sometimes you need someone to make you stand in line and take your 20 and put your change in your hand, and that's how you get back inside yourself. She was behind the counter. She looked up. She saw me. She put down the rotisserie chicken tongs. "You took it apart," she said. "The bundle?" I asked because I wanted the grace of misunderstanding. "Winter," she said. "You took Winter apart and invited hunger in." "I put it back," I said more loudly than a man should talk in that store. She shook her head. "Once is enough. Don't say his name. Don't say your name. Don't give it the map." "I burned it," I said. "I burned its face." She nodded as if that, at least, was a grammar she could live with. She poured spruce gum into a paper cup and slid it across the counter. "Chew," she said. "Keep your mouth busy." I chewed. It tasted like clean. I thought about the iron and the way it glowed, a small star you could wrap your hand around, and the thing's recoil, and I felt I had held onto something that could be a life raft if I didn't let it turn to a needle. "I have to go back," I said. "Don't," she said. "There's an old man out there in a circle of trees being curated." "You think he's alive?" she asked softly, not mocking, just measuring a hope to see if it would fit through a door. "I think alive is not the only thing you can be and still be saved," I said, and realized I meant taken back, not saved. People die in the woods all the time. We take the bodies back so their names stop wandering. She nodded once and put something else in my hand, a small pouch the color of snow when it's old, tied with hide. "Wear it on your chest," she said. "Don't open it. Don't ask me what's in it. Don't thank me. You learn a new kind of obedience in a winter like that." I went back that afternoon. The moon was up before the sun was down, because that's how petty they are in December. They fight and make you move between them like a child of divorce. I didn't call staging because I wanted to be the only idiot on the report if this went sideways. I left my truck at the same turnaround and I walked in with my eyes lowered like something in the trees had bright lights I didn't want to blind myself with. The bundle on the sapling was gone. The tracks had wandered over themselves so many times the world was just footprints pretending to be shadows. I found the ring in the trees by smell. I don't mean that as a metaphor. It smelled like meat cut from bone and ice that had learned to laugh. The pile in the center had grown. There was a thermos cap with teeth dents in it. There was a strip of old man's flannel with a pocket, and in the pocket, there was a license card with a photograph of a boy in orange and the hands I told you about earlier. The card was old. The boy was older now. I hoped he could keep those hands when this was over. "Walt," I said, then clamped my lips so hard I tasted iron that wasn't there. A voice above me said, "Walt." And it didn't sound like me, and it didn't sound like the bottle wind anymore either. It sounded like a choir that had been told it could eat if it learned to harmonize. "Don't answer," I told myself, and this time I listened. I made a plan out of 3 parts. Plans are always 3 parts when you want to feel like protagonists. Part 1, become less appealing. Part 2, make a mouthful the mouth will regret. Part 3, do not get invited. For the first, I stripped down to my base layers, then wetted them from my canteen. I rubbed ashes from my stove brick into my skin until I smelled like something the world had already eaten. For the second, I took the rest of the spruce gum and chewed until my saliva was gluey. I spit it into the mouth of my spare Nalgene and mixed it with powdered pepper and the little bottle of pain cream from my kit and shook it until it looked like something illegal. I poured it on the outside of my parka, the sleeves, the back of my neck. I made myself taste like medicine and tree. For the third, I took Dawn's pouch and looped it where my dog tags would go if I had ever been that kind of man. It sat over my sternum like a small, patient animal. It warmed. Don't ask me to tell you what was in it. I didn't open it. I am grateful every day that I didn't give the story that piece. I stepped into the circle. The trees flexed. The thing moved along a branch like a knot behind a rope. It had burned poorly around the mouth. New flesh had filmed over the edges in a way flesh doesn't do. It looked offended, which is a ridiculous word until you've seen something that thought it was the definition of desire meet something that said no. "Walt," it said. Perfect this time. The name rang exactly like the boy in the photo might say it in a kitchen while asking for more pancakes. It said it again. Walt. And this time the syllable went through me and came out the other side and made the snow shiver. I tasted spruce and hurt. I breathed through the pouch's slow heat. I took a coal from the lidded stove box I had strapped to my pack. I don't know if you've ever carried a coal across snow. It feels like smuggling summer. I dropped it into a nest of punky wood and bark I'd prepared, and breathed and got a little universe going. The thing hung back. It was not afraid. It was cautious the way cats are when they realize the table has moved a 1/4 inch. and the universe is thus unacceptable. It looked at the fire, it looked at me, it looked at the pile of curated wrong in the center of the ring. It made that bottle sound in reverse, out instead of in. That somehow was worse. I said, "I'm not inviting you," and when my mouth opened, the pouch warmed until it hurt, and I shut up. It came down, slow at first, then fast. I had one trick. I threw my parka like a matador throws his red. It hit the thing around the shoulders and the hood flopped over its burned mouth. It inhaled reflexively and filled its nose with menthol and pepper and spruce, and the idea of being chewed by humans. It made a noise that could have been laughter, if laughter could cut ice. I moved on it with the iron from the stove lit again, and I knew this was hubris and stupidity and men. I hit it. It didn't matter how many times I hit it. It mattered that I hit it once in the eye, not the eye. The place that held the idea of the eye together, it reeled. The trees flung up snow like goats at a sacrificial altar shaking their stupid beards after drinking. It leapt away from me the way a man jumps from a hose that has surprised him by being a snake. It took the flannel scrap in its claw hand. It took the thermos cap. It took nothing else. It sprang into the canopy and disappeared. I followed the crash sound until I couldn't tell if the sound was in the trees or in my bones. I went to the pile in the middle. I went on my knees because sometimes the only posture left is the one where you don't pretend you can be tall. There was a thing in the pile I hadn't seen because I hadn't wanted to. A glove. Inside the glove, a hand. Old man's hand. The hand of the boy in the photo, 40 years later. The skin was waxed into itself by cold and desire. The fingers were curled as if they had died around something they loved. I took that hand like it was the only thing left in the world. I put it in my pack and it warmed a little and smelled like trapped time. I didn't know what else to do but give it back. On the way out, I felt the thing following me along the tops of the trees, patient again, offended again. My parka steamed where I had drenched it in lies. The pouch burned cold against my breastbone, a strange contradiction that made sense. The boy in the photograph had probably eaten pancakes with real maple syrup. Someone had slid the bottle across the table and said, "Don't drown them." He had drowned them anyway. He had laughed and wiped his mouth. I walked into the store and put the hand on the counter on a paper towel. Dawn didn't flinch. She reached out and touched the back of the glove with 2 fingers, like a woman touching a letter that says nothing and everything. She nodded once, like a woman saying grace without moving her lips. Then she wrapped the hand back up, tighter, smaller, more done. She placed the bundle in a grocery bag and handed it back to me. "Take him where he belongs," she said. I drove to the gate on County 44. I walked the road all the way to the plow turnaround. I put the bag under the photograph on the dashboard of Walt's truck. I tucked the thermos cap next to it because there are games even hunger shouldn't be allowed to win. I sat in the driver's seat and put my hands on the wheel and breathed until the ice on the windshield crawled inward like a spider dying. That was 2 weeks ago. The thing comes to my porch at night and leans its antlers against my windows because the glass remembers heat and makes a sound that pleases it. It tries my name, and there are days it gets close enough that I feel my heart rise to go to it like a dog to a whistle. I chew spruce gum until my jaw aches so I won't say the wrong thing to the dark. I keep the stove iron propped in the coals like a weapon I can pretend is just a tool. I cannot tell if I have kept it out or let it in politely in a way no one can see. The hunger has learned something from me. Maybe how to be patient. Maybe how to make squares out of laces. Twice I have found my bootlaces on my kitchen table, laid out in little maps that look like county roads in winter. Twice I have found my name written in frost on the inside of the window and watched it fade when my breath hit it. Once, I woke with the taste of penny in my mouth and the iron cooling beside my bed, and a small cigarette burn on my palm, where I must have touched it in my sleep. Once I woke standing barefoot in the snow in my yard, and only the pouch around my neck was warm. I am not righteous. I am not a hero. I brought something home because I wanted to draw a straight line between a forest and a town, and say here, it doesn't care about lines, it cares about doors. If you live north of the 47th parallel and you hear your name called from the tree line at night, don't answer. If your window fogs up with your breath and you see letters in it you don't remember writing, don't read them out loud. If you're out in the sticks and you find a bundle of bones tied with twine, leave it shut. Tie it tighter and walk away backward like you don't have a spine to turn. And if you have an iron and a fire, make a little star. Sometimes the world only listens when you speak in a language it recognizes. Heat and hurt. The kind that says you cannot eat here. It will sulk. It will wait. It will learn your patterns and your stares and your songs. It will do a better impression of you than you could do of it. It will notice that winter makes us all smaller and some of us hollow enough to crawl into. This is the part where I tell you I'm okay and that all you have to do is follow these rules and you will be too. That would be a different genre than the one I'm writing in. At 2:13 this morning, someone knocked on my door. Not the test knock, not the polite am I invited. This was a neighbor knock, the kind where someone comes to borrow sugar. I got out of bed and took my iron and set the iron on the stove and waited until stars came back to live in it. "Evan?" said a voice. Not almost. Not practice. It was a voice I loved best in the world. It was Matt. He had the little upturn at the end he used when he wanted me to help him move a couch. The sound that says you owe me with a smile. "Evan," he said again because names are keys, and I was the lock. I didn't answer. I threw up quietly in my mouth and swallowed. I put my hand on the pouch, and it was neither hot nor cold this time. It was heavy. It was a weight exactly the shape of guilt. "Evan, buddy," Matt said, and his breath fogged under the door in a way breath doesn't when the night is this cold. He laughed, the same laugh from 20 years ago, the one that used to kick soccer balls into lakes purely to see whether they would skip. "Open up." I opened the window instead. I leaned out into the cut glass night and I saw it, finally, without metaphor. Hunger wearing the coat of someone I loved. The mouth had healed almost all the way around the burn. The eye was milked in a way that made it mournfully more beautiful, because nothing loves tragedy more than the thing that caused it. I lifted the iron, and the iron said language in white out the window. It touched the skin the world would call cheek if you were being generous. It hissed. He dropped the voice he wore like a fashion. He dropped the antlers down the way a man bows when he is forgiven by someone whose forgiveness doesn't matter. He stepped backward into the tree line, and he didn't run. He simply began. He will come back. I know that now, the way you know where the river is when you sleep by its bank. I don't know what will happen when the stars in my iron go out, or the pouch's thread wears through, or I say my name while dreaming and make my own door. I keep the spruce gum by the stove. I keep my bootlaces tied in knots that have no names, and practice them with my eyes closed like prayers I have to invent. I keep the photograph from Walt's truck on my kitchen wall, the boy with the hands that were lucky and then old. I keep the hand in the cemetery because that's what we do. Put pieces back where they can belong, even if belonging is only a polite lie. This is all I know how to do. Speak plainly, warn you, and admit that if winter is a decision, hunger is a habit. If you break one, the other walks in. If you open the door, even a little, even because you are cold and kind, the thing will try your name until you forget there were ever any other words. So when you hear it tonight, do what I do. Put your mouth full of tree. Hold your silence like a hot iron. Let the knock happen. Let it fail. And when you can't hold it anymore, when the cold has made your thoughts creak, when the letters write themselves in frost on your window, say this to yourself and no one else. I am not invited. You are not welcomed. I am full. Say it again, slower, like a prayer. Then lie to yourself if you have to. It's warmer that way. And if I stop posting, if the gum hardens into a little brown stone in a bowl by a cold stove no one cleans, if you hear a story about a man in a place with one road that doesn't get plowed, don't come for me. Don't come for my name. Don't say it where winter can hear.